Hello, movie lovers. Welcome back to SignaMovie channel. Today is all about fresh cinema experiences, and I can't wait to share my thoughts on the newest film making its mark. Sit back, relax, and let's dive into the recap of this exciting cinematic adventure. The film begins in Texas, with a group of bound and enslaved black men roaming the middle of the Texas desert, directed by brothers Ace and Dickie. It was 2 years before the Civil War in 1858, and unfortunately Django was one of the enslaved blacks who separated from his wife, Vermhilde von Schaft, after being sold. Later that night, their journey is abruptly interrupted by the doctor. King Schultz, a German dentist turned bounty hunter, staggers toward them in the dark, and King Schultz interrupts them. Because of this, when Ace asks Schultz to voice his concerns, he ends up becoming enraged at being harassed. Schultz immediately reacts and tries to calm Ace down by saying that he is just a tired traveler looking for a pair of slave traders known as the Speck Brothers. To be precise, since Schultz is trying to buy Django with knowledge of the three outlaw Brittle brothers, he speculates that the Speck Brothers bought these men at the auction in Greenville where Django is located. Schultz begins asking enslaved black people if any of them lived on the Kerry plantation to buy Django. After Django speaks, Schultz brings a kerosene lamp and shines it in the enslaved black man's face and finds Django. He then asked Django if he had any information about the Brittle brothers, so Django said their names, Big John, Ellis, and Roger, who they sometimes call Little Roger. Django then goes on to talk about them, saying that they were overseers of the Kerry plantation owned by the previous owner. But Schultz stops him and tells Django that they are no longer directors. Then, if Django meets the Brittle brothers again, he asks if he recognizes them. However, Ace suddenly interrupts them and warns Schultz to stop talking to Django like that. Mr. Schultz tries to placate him, saying he is just the owner trying to make a deal. However, Ace refuses to sell Django, and when Schultz refuses his orders, he ends up pointing a gun at Django. Schultz even teases Ace by asking if he is carried away by Ace's dramatic gestures, or if he is deliberately pointing the gun at him with cruel intentions. Left with no other choice, Schultz suddenly shoots Ace in the head and Dickie's horse, killing him after receiving threats against Ace. Because of this, Dickie clings to the ground, and the dead horse puts its weight on his body. Later, Schultz goes to Dickie's area and sarcastically apologizes for shooting his beast. But Mr. Schultz didn't want Dickie to do anything rash before he came to his senses. Even seeing how irritated Dickie is, Schultz prefers to keep his cool and keep his arguments to a minimum, as he still wants to finish his investigation with Django. Schultz then returns to Django's position to continue the conversation, and after hearing that Django can still recognize the Brittle brothers, he insists that Dickie pay him his due price. Unfortunately, Schultz kills Dickie, leaving the other enslaved blacks behind, and Django takes Ace's coat and horse. The next day, Django and Schultz arrive in Daughtry, Texas, where he unwittingly attracts the attention of the homeowners, as Django is the first black person they have ever seen riding a horse. Luckily, they suddenly own a bar restaurant when the innkeeper runs away when he sees Django come in with Schultz. Schultz then talks about his plans to pursue his new career. It's a bounty hunter who trades corpses after a slave trade that trades human lives for cash. Strictly speaking, a bounty hunter's job is to kill enslaved people and then transport their bodies to the authorities so that they can then collect the bounty. Although Schultz hates slavery, he tells Django that he needs help because he uses slavery to his advantage. Unfortunately, Schultz feels guilty and agrees with Django that he will have his freedom if Django kills the Brittle brothers and pays him $75. Schultz and Django then begin their journey. Schultz suddenly learns that Django is a married man after hearing his answer to find him a wife and buy his freedom. Django reveals that Vermhilde grew up with Germans and later learned a little German. Vermhilde works as a house slave for the von Schaft family. After the conversation, they head to a mansion in Tennessee to seek shelter while Django makes plans to enter a plantation where he plays a ballet character and gives a performance. Schultz gives Django the freedom to choose whatever costume he wants. They then go to the plantation and visit Spencer Big Daddy Bennett and buy one of his slave traders. Fortunately, Big Daddy agrees, and Schultz takes this opportunity to order his slaves to punish Django on his grand plantation. When Bettina is circling Django on the plantation, Django suddenly asks her if she knows anything about the Brittle brothers. But Bettina says she says no, so she suspects Django could use another name. Fortunately, Bettina points out the shepherds who have come to Big Daddy's farm in recent years. Unbeknownst to her Bettina, she tells her three siblings who are the leaders, and her first brother, Ellis Brittle, is in the field. At the same time, Bettina points out that two Brittles are in the stable, punishing little Jody for breaking an egg. So Django immediately goes to the two Brittle brothers and orders Bettina to bring Schultz to the scene. While whipping little Jody, Django suddenly kills John and continues to beat little Raj even after he fights back. Later, when Schultz arrives at the stable and asks Django the names of the two Brittles he killed, he shoots little Large 5 times. Django then says that Ellis was just running across the field, and Schultz allows him to be shot without hesitation. Later that night, Big Daddy tries to attack Django and Schultz with force, but he lets them escape after killing the Brittle brothers, as he had a warrant out that afternoon. Unfortunately, they are unable to convince Big Daddy of the punishment for using deadly force against a court official and must fulfill their duty until his death. Left with no other option, Schultz outsmarts the troops with explosives by tricking them with carts. Fortunately, Schultz hits the mark after colliding with the carriage and hands the sniper over to Django to shoot Big Daddy. Django and Schultz then spend the night eating, but Django starts talking about his wife. Schultz happily tells Django a story about his friend Brumhilde. Schultz feels responsible for Django, and he tells him that since he saved Brumhilde, he cannot in good conscience let Django go to Greenville. There, Schultz talks about the bounty hunting business that Django might like to buy his wife's freedom. Django learns of Schultz's offer to work with him through the winter until the snow melts. Django then receives his third of Schultz's winnings. Technically, Schultz agrees to help Django, and he says he will personally take Django to Greenville and find out where the Germans are sending his wife. The next day, Django and Schultz return to Texas to begin their first mission. Meanwhile, Django shoots Sumiti Bakal and keeps the flyer as a souvenir. Because of this, Django receives his first bounty and ends up practicing shooting snowmen. Django and Schultz then spend the winter, collecting some rewards by spring and killing many suspects without a fight. They then travel to Mississippi, only to see many enslaved black people on the streets. They finally learn that Brumhilde's new owner is Calvin J. Candy, owner of Candyland, his fourth largest cotton plantation in Mississippi. Desperate, Schultz asks Calvin how he plans to get them, and Schultz suggests another plan of action. Instead of buying a horse, they want to buy a farm. Schultz then suggests that Django become an expert in fighting the Mandingos he has hired. His personality must be great. Money buyers from Dusseldorf to Greenville attend Mandingo fighting games. Strictly speaking, Calvin is a kind of owner. This forced his slaves to fight him to the death in Mandingo's brutal battle. After some time, Django and Schultz meet. Calvin is in the Masters Club, and he is watching. While Django refuses to meet Mandingo, Mandingo fights. Schultz then follows Calvin, who talks to Champion Fred and tries to offer $12,000 to one of the best fighters as an excuse to get Brumhilde for a small amount, as Calvin doesn't want to sell her. Luckily, they caught Calvin's attention, and I also received an invitation to Candyland. The next day, Schultz apologizes to Calvin and talks to Django. He says that Brumhilde is in Candyland and that she shouldn't come, taken away when he retaliated. I want to meet his wife. Technically, they were on their way to that location when they suddenly encountered Calvin's slave hunters. They cornered the escaped Mandingo fighter D'Artagnan with 9 dogs. D'Artagnan then pleads with Calvin not to fight anymore, but he simply orders him to go down and have a proper talk. Unfortunately, Calvin loses the final battle and ends up being embarrassed. Ask if you don't know what redemption means. A frustrated Schultz tries to save D'Artagnan by offering to refund the money, but Django intervenes and prevents Schultz from hiding. Calvin then stops and approaches Django questioningly. If you don't mind him getting involved with D'Artagnan, that means ordering the sniffer dog to kill D'Artagnan. Schultz is upset and has no other choice. To prevent D'Artagnan from being eaten by dogs? They then continue arriving at Candyland, It was as if nothing had happened in the forest. Suddenly, Stephen is shocked to see Django riding a horse with Schultze. There, Calvin reveals that Django is her free man and orders him to treat her well. Schultz wants Calvin to meet Hilda Broomhilda and encourages him to smear her name. Unfortunately, Django learns of their mistreatment of Broomhilda and almost brings out the gun because of it. When you realize you need a weapon, to calm down and buy his wife. Django is disappointed and watches as a crying Broomhilda takes them to the trash can to clean it. Later that night, Lara Lee takes Bromhilda to Schultz's room to talk. He then reminds Bromhilda to only speak German. And the movie ends here. Thanks for watching our video. If you enjoyed this film recap and want more, subscribe now, like, and share captivating stories with your friends. Tell me which movie you'd like me to summarize next. See you soon.